Namaste and welcome to the Aham Bharatham Podcast, the voice of a timeless nation.
Today we are exploring something truly profound. It is a journey into the very heartbeat of India, a journey of insight and timeless wisdom.
We have a truly fascinating collection of ideas to unpack today, diving deep into one of the world's oldest continuous philosophical traditions, Hindu wisdom.
And we're examining its intricate and I think quite surprising relationship with modern scientific inquiry.
The insights we're discussing come from the thinking of Aham Bharatham, which offers a very potent argument for a kind of philosophical humility in our modern age.
It's a vital lens to look through, isn't it? Especially today. The core argument that Aham Bharatham put forward is that we need to stop viewing these ancient traditions as, mere historical relics.
Right, as something dusty on a shelf.
Exactly, and start viewing them as active, living philosophical guides. They pose a fundamental challenge to the way we currently process information.
So the mission of this deep dive really is to explore the difference between knowing and realizing. We're going to try and understand how ancient India fostered this culture of profound intellectual inquiry, but without the baggage of ego.
A culture that actually demanded constant revision.
Yes, and exploration. And we have to ask, why does that spirit of humility matter so desperately now, in an age defined by such rapid scientific advancement and just overwhelming information?
Well, the problem, as Aham Bharatham so sharply observes, is that we are, in a sense, drowning in information. All the quantifiable, the external, the verifiable data points, but we are arguably starving for wisdom.
That's a powerful way to put it.
We are accumulating facts much, much faster than we're processing their meaning. Or integrating them into a coherent worldview.
So this is about looking at knowledge not as a final, immovable achievement.
Like a certificate you hang on the wall.
Exactly. Not a certificate of completion, but as a dynamic journey of consciousness that is always refining itself. It's about understanding the distinction between having a piece of information stored in your head and realizing that information, embodying it as insight in your life.
That sets the stage perfectly.
So let's jump straight into the very foundation of this entire idea. This concept that in ancient India, knowledge was fundamentally discovered, not declared. The highest truth wasn't some rigid written dogma handed down from an absolute authority figure, but was seen as a profound silence achieved through deep, collaborative, and often really challenging reflection.
And that idea of discovered truth is the crucial starting point, isn't it? Because it inherently provides a kind of preventative measure against the development of rigid dogma.
How so?
Well, if the deepest truth is something you arrive at through experience, through contemplation and reflection, then your personal journey toward that realization can, and often should, differ from mine.
Ah, I see. It encourages a personal, sustained exploration rather than
compulsory, standardized belief. Exactly. And this prevents the entire philosophical system from becoming, ossified over time.
And the single most profound example of this foundational intellectual humility comes from the Rig Veda itself, one of the oldest spiritual texts on the planet. We are talking about the Nasadiya Sukta, the hymn of creation.
Yes, the material from Aham Bharatham holds this up as the ultimate expression of Vedic non-dogmatism.
The historical context here is it's key. You have to imagine the ancient sages, the rishis, gathered under these vast starlit skies, asking what is probably the most ambitious philosophical question of all time.
What existed before existence itself?
Right. I mean, they weren't satisfied with the simple explanation of a deity creating things out of nothing.
No, ex nihilo, as they say. They push back to the point of non-being, trying to comprehend the nature of the void before the cosmos even began to unfold.
And if you look at most creation narratives across other cultures, particularly in the Near East and the Abrahamic traditions, they offer a very decisive, centralized answer.
Oh, absolutely. They are narratives of certainty. In the beginning, God created, or Marduk fought Tiamat. These are declarative statements. They provide a finished, satisfying narrative of origin.
A neat and tidy story.
Precisely. They create a definitive, immovable starting point that then dictates all subsequent morality and behavior.
Yeah.
But the Vedic sages did something completely different and, frankly, revolutionary.
They didn't propose a definitive answer.
No, because they understood that the true nature of the origin might be, by its very definition, beyond the capacity of human language and mortal comprehension.
And here's where it gets really, really interesting. This is where the philosophy championed by Aham Bharatham draws its spiritual backbone, After pages of contemplating the void, contemplating this primordial energetic stirring, and the very first differentiation of reality, the text gives us that incredible concluding line.
The ultimate act of intellectual surrender.
Who knows? Perhaps even he does not know.
And that he, the one overseeing the cosmos, the ultimate controller, the very first one who breathed, even that entity is placed within the realm of possible mystery.
It's not a rhetorical flourish, is it?
Not in the slightest. It is the ultimate humility. It asserts that if the supreme consciousness, the origin of all thought, cannot claim final absolute certainty about its own origin,
Then how can we?
then any certainty claimed by rural beings must be inherently relative and provisional.
That is radical, even today. I mean, we live in a world where people fiercely defend their beliefs as objective truth.
And the Nasadiya Sukta isn't an expression of cynicism or, doubt in the modern skeptical sense.
No.
It's a profound comfort with not knowing. It provides an invitation to explore eternally, rather than a final answer to simply believe and defend. It suggests that the journey of inquiry is the definition of the spiritual life.
This singular idea, then, this acceptance of the infinite unknowability of the ultimate origin, is the intellectual template that defines the non-dogmatic nature that Aham Bharatham speaks of.
Yes. It essentially grants every seeker, every philosopher, and every scientist permission to continue asking the fundamental questions, knowing that the journey itself is the reward.
And that reaching a final, certain destination is probably an impossible human construct.
It makes the act of inquiry an eternal process, because the answer is perpetually just beyond the complete horizon of our comprehension.
So if the ultimate creator is willing to admit the mystery of its own origin, then why should we, as finite beings constrained by limited senses and subjective minds, ever claim final, unassailable certainty about anything?
The cultural template established millennia ago was one of provisional knowledge. And this is why Aham Bharatham argues that this wisdom remains so critically relevant today, particularly in a world where certainty is so often wielded as an ideological weapon.
We have to elaborate on the weight of this. Most ancient systems, when faced with an ontological mystery, the question of existence, they either resort to definitive theology or just silence.
Right. They either give you an answer or tell you not to ask the question.
But the Vedic response is neither. It's not silence, and it's not absolute declaration.
It is the establishment of a dialogue with the mystery. It formalizes the admission of ignorance as the starting point for true knowledge.
Which transforms ignorance from a failure into a prerequisite for discovery.
Exactly. If you think you already know the answer, you stop searching.
Of course.
But if you recognize the vastness of what you don't know, the search becomes endless and fruitful. And that constant search leads us directly to the inherent weakness that Aham Bharatham identifies in the way modern knowledge often presents itself.
Right. So transitioning to the modern world, we absolutely have to acknowledge the extraordinary power, the success, and the progress of contemporary science.
Oh, without question.
It is by far the most effective tool humanity has ever developed for understanding and manipulating the physical world. We've mapped the human genome, we've sent telescopes to the very edge of the observed universe, we've built complex learning machines.
Unquestionably. And science operates on self-correction. It's designed to be provisional. The scientific method itself requires falsifiability. That is its great strength.
No.
The insight from Aham Bharatham identifies a crucial cultural weakness. A scientific paradox, you could call it.
Yeah.
While the underlying process is one of constant revision, each new, groundbreaking discovery often arrives culturally wrapped in certainty.
And that certainty, even if it's temporary and strictly limited to the current paradigm, it creates this deeply seductive illusion of finality, this institutional feeling that now we finally know the truth, the definitive model, until, of course, the next genius comes along and completely overturns the established framework.
So science's strength is in its technical willingness to overturn old theories, but its weakness, as Aham Bharatham suggests, is often in the institutional and cultural hubris that accompanies the acceptance of the new ones.
Let's dedicate some time to the case studies here, because they make this cyclical certainty so palpable and relatable for you, the listener. For centuries, the entire structure of human cosmology and metaphysics was built on one foundation.
That the Earth was the immovable center of the universe, the Ptolemaic model.
The certainty was absolute. It was codified by religious institutions, validated by the ruling scholars of the time, and frankly, it made perfect sense based on everyday observation. The sun looks like it goes around us.
To propose otherwise was not just a scientific error, it was a societal threat. a heresy.
Then came Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo, and suddenly that certain absolute center of the cosmos became just one planet orbiting a very ordinary star.
The certainty collapsed, utterly, under the weight of better data and better mathematics.
And the history of physics is an even more powerful example of this cyclical replacement, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. For nearly 200 years, Newton's laws were treated as the immutable universal truth. They explained motion, mechanics, gravity, the predictability of the cosmos with stunning precision. People thought physics was basically finished.
The clockwork universe.
The clockwork universe. It was believed, even by Newton himself, that these laws described objective reality. Absolutely. That was certainty solidified into intellectual dogma.
But I have to push back on this a little bit. Isn't that simply the nature of progress? We build the best model we can with the tools we have. Science doesn't claim absolute truth. It claims the best available model. Is Aham Bharatham being fair in criticizing the certainty that inevitably attaches itself to the most successful model?
That is a critical question. And the argument isn't a criticism of the scientific method itself, but of the human response to scientific success. It argues that success breeds intellectual dogmatism, even if the underlying science doesn't justify it. Yes, Newton provided the best model, but the culture treated it as the final model. Then Einstein arrived and proved that Newton's world was only true at relatively slow speeds and medium scales.
He showed that the absolute knowledge held for 2 centuries was merely an exceptionally good approximation under certain conditions.
The illusion of finality it dissolved. Because the very fabric of space and time, the foundations of Newton's model, had to be radically reimagined.
And the cycle tightened even further. Einstein's relativity defined a predictable causal universe of massive objects.
A beautiful, elegant system.
But when we zoomed into the subatomic world, the classical certainties vanished completely. Quantum physics blurred everything.
Suddenly, certainty was replaced by probabilistic mathematics. Observation fundamentally changed the outcome. The precise, absolute world became fluid and, fundamentally uncertain.
Even in smaller bureaucratic matters, we see this illusion of finality. Think about the cultural weight of classifying objects.
Like Pluto.
Exactly, Pluto. We taught generations of children the names of 9 planets. Pluto was a planet. That was a known, verifiable certainty in every textbook, a fact you memorize for exams.
Until the International Astronomical Union revised the definition of a planet in 2006. And it was based on the discovery of other massive objects out in the Kuiper Belt.
So Pluto didn't physically change?
Not at all.
Yeah.
But our definition of what it is changed completely. The certainty we once held was dissolved by revised criteria. This is the key point Aham Bharatham makes. Scientific knowledge is always relative to the current definition, the current instrument, and the current consensus.
So if we connect this all the way back, the Vedic spirit, which begins with the Nasadiya Sukta's humility, offers a critical preventative measure against this whole cycle.
Yes, this cycle of temporary certainty leading to inevitable intellectual disillusionment and defensive dogmatism.
It prevents the intellectual vertigo.
It does, because the Vedic spirit recognizes from the very beginning that human comprehension is always partial, because reality, the Brahman, is infinite. If you start with profound humility, if you start with the acknowledgement that even he does not know, then every subsequent scientific discovery, no matter how groundbreaking, is simply another stepping stone on an infinite path.
It's never a final answer.
It's only a better, more nuanced question. This fundamental humility is the core lesson that Aham Bharatham suggests modern scientific culture could borrow. It allows for monumental change without the emotional trauma of having to admit a fundamental, ego-shattering error.
It reframes science from a conquest of truth into a constant, humbling interaction with mystery.
And that courage to remain humble leads us to the unique intellectual environment that fostered this philosophy for thousands of years. The inherent lack of ego in the pursuit of truth is what sustained this philosophical framework for millennia.
Aham Bharatham describes the Vedic spirit as open source, which is just a brilliant analogy.
It is. It immediately contrasts the nature of these ancient scriptures with what we typically understand as mandated religious dogma.
I find that concept, the open source truth, revolutionary when we're talking about ancient societies. When the ancient rishis shared their insights, they established a system where the concept of, absolute intellectual property,
a single defined truth owned and controlled by a person, a church, or a king.
Right. That simply couldn't take root. They weren't interested in claiming ownership of the truth. They pursued it as a living, breathing, evolving relationship that required constant intellectual nourishment.
And you see this non-authoritarian structure reflected in the very composition and style of their core texts. Take the Upanishads, which contain the profound philosophical core of the Vedas.
They aren't presented as rigid commandments delivered from on high.
Not at all. They are almost universally structured as intense dialogues. Often tense, incredibly complex, occasionally contradictory, usually set between a questioning student and a guiding teacher, often debated in a forest setting.
And the most famous example globally has to be the Bhagavad Gita. It's a foundational text, yet its entire structure is a debate.
It unfolds in the most stressful, uncertain environment imaginable, the precipice of a massive civil war.
And it features this long, detailed dialogue between profound doubt, represented by the warrior Arjuna, and necessary action, represented by Krishna. Arjuna is allowed to express despair, existential confusion. He questions the very foundation of his life's purpose and his societal role.
He is not merely told what to do. He demands and is given a philosophical justification for existence, for action, karma, and for duty, karma. The important insight from Aham Bharatham here is that Arjuna's lengthy, agonizing questioning is given monumental weight and dignity,
suggesting that questioning is not a challenge to authority,
but a necessary process for true realization. The acceptance of duty is earned through sustained, critical philosophical instruction, not through blind obedience.
And the Vedas themselves, the earliest layer of these texts, are characterized not as manuals of belief, but as songs of curiosity.
A lovely phrase.
It is. They capture the initial raw bursts of wonder and questioning, the philosophical brainstorming sessions, you could say, before any rigid framework or institution had set in. That level of radical openness is what Aham Bharatham is highlighting as so crucial.
And this openness manifested in a truly revolutionary intellectual environment where debate was actively seen as reverence, not rebellion.
That's a huge shift in perspective.
A student who questioned the teacher with rigor was not being disrespectful. They were engaging in the sacred fire that kept wisdom refined and alive. It meant the student was engaging deeply with the concepts, not just passively receiving prepackaged information.
But let's introduce a point of critique here. While the texts may present themselves as open source, historically wasn't access to the Vedas and philosophical learning often severely restricted by caste and gender in later periods. Doesn't Aham Bharatham risk presenting an idealized, perhaps sanitized view of this philosophical freedom?
That is a very necessary qualification. While the philosophical intent of the early Vedic period was clearly one of radical openness, as we see from the Sukta, the subsequent institutionalization of that philosophy, particularly during later periods when social structures became rigid, certainly restricted access. The material from Aham Bharatham acknowledges that the spirit of the Veda was often betrayed by the structures of society. However, the importance of the anecdotes provided, stories that were preserved and celebrated even when the societal structures were restrictive, shows that the ideal of fearless intellectual inquiry never entirely vanished.
So let's focus on those specific anecdotes because they dramatically illustrate this ideal of fearless inquiry. Take the story of Gargi Bachaknovi.
A fascinating figure.
We are talking about a woman philosopher living in the first millennium BCE who challenges Yajnavalkya, one of the most revered sages of his time, in a massive royal court.
The setting is absolutely critical. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad records a grand philosophical debate where the king of Videha offers a reward of 1,000 cows to the wisest sage. Yajnavalkya claims the prize, essentially inviting anyone to challenge him.
And Gargi, a woman in that era, steps forward. She doesn't just ask simple questions. She challenges him directly on the very nature of existence itself. She asks, since the whole world is woven back and forth on water, on what, pray, is water woven back and forth?
And he answers, and she just keeps going, systematically dismantling his answers, eventually probing the nature of the Brahman ultimate reality, the very essence underlying all existence. Her inquiries were so persistent, so penetrating,
that at one point Yajnavalkya is recorded as saying, essentially, do not push this topic any further, Gargi, or your head might fall off.
Right. And we must understand the context there. He wasn't silencing her out of a lack of knowledge, but because her questions were pushing the absolute limits of human language and conceptual understanding, the immense cultural value placed on this fierce intellectual engagement.
The fact that this challenge from a woman was recorded, preserved, and celebrated.
That is the deep insight here. It shows that the true value was in the process of questioning, even if it pushed the boundaries to the breaking point.
Then there's the story of Nachiketa from the Katha Upanishad. He's not a revered sage, he's a young, determined boy.
And through a series of ritual events, he ends up debating the highest authority on death and time, Yama, the god of death himself.
A young boy debating death.
It's incredible. Nachiketa seeks the one knowledge that transcends death, the secret of what happens after we die, the nature of the enduring self, the Atman. And Yama tries everything to distract him. He offers wealth, long life, kingship, earthly pleasures.
Basically tempting him with all the ephemeral knowing of the world.
Exactly. But Nachiketa insists repeatedly on the deeper spiritual realization. His persistent, intelligent inquiry forces the god of death, the ultimate authority on that topic, to reveal some of the most profound truths about the unity of Atman and Brahman.
This isn't just a moral tale, then. It is a powerful cultural statement.
That sincerity and intensity of inquiry matter more than age, social standing, or even the authority of the entity you are questioning. The gods, too, must submit to rigorous philosophical challenge.
So the spirit that Aham Bharatham champions fundamentally changes how we view these ancient societies. They weren't defined solely by fixed hierarchies in their philosophical core.
No, they were radically open to revision, debate, and the inclusion of diverse, often revolutionary perspectives. It's a living model for intellectual humility that is so desperately needed today, in an age saturated by polarized information bubbles where people rarely engage with ideas they disagree with.
The ultimate takeaway from this open source approach is that the knowledge must be earned internally. If it were dogma, you could just passively receive it.
But because it is a relationship of inquiry, you must actively realize it.
Which brings us to the core distinction this exploration from Aham Bharatham makes.
Right. Having established the cultural necessity of intellectual freedom and the absence of dogmatic finality, we now have to drill down into the core philosophical distinction, the precise difference between knowing and realizing.
This is the synthesis point, isn't it, between the modern scientific path and the ancient spiritual path?
It is.
So let's start by defining knowing, which is the realm that modern science has essentially perfected. Knowing is achieved through external, repeatable, and quantifiable mechanisms.
Objective observation, meticulous analysis, and controlled experiment. It is at its heart information acquisition.
Knowing is an external process. It focuses on the measurable, the objective, and the predictable. This knowledge evolves horizontally, as Aham Bharatham notes.
Expanding laterally as our instrumentation improves. We see farther with better telescopes, we calculate faster with more sensitive supercomputers, we map more accurately with enhanced sensors. The ultimate goal of this knowing is mastery to control, predict, and manipulate nature for human benefit.
The knowledge rests in the accumulated data and theories.
Yes. Now contrast that with realizing, the Vedic approach. Realizing is achieved through internal, subjective, and non-transferable mechanisms.
Deep silence, focused reflection, and direct personal, subjective experience.
It is fundamentally consciousness expansion. Realizing is an internal, deeply subjective process, focused not on external phenomena, but on consciousness and awareness itself. This realization deepens vertically, expanding as consciousness expands, often through disciplined practices like meditation, deep philosophical contemplation, or focused ethical living.
And the goal of realization is not mastery, but harmonization.
Precisely. To recognize the inherent unity between the observer, the Atman, and the observed, the Brahman. The knowledge here rests in the state of being itself.
Now, for you listening, the conventional interpretation of this is usually head knowledge versus heart knowledge, but Aham Bharatham pushes us past that simplification.
It does. It makes the powerful argument that both are not just useful. They're absolutely essential. They're not competing truths. They are complementary halves of a unified human understanding.
And that unity is the key insight. Science explains how the world works, the mechanics, the processes, the chemical reactions, the evolutionary timeline.
In spirituality, the realization path asks the complementary question: why does it exist at all? What is the meaning, the purpose, the ultimate context for this elaborate mechanical world?
If you pursue knowing exclusively, you can end up with profound technological capability, but potentially no ethical or existential anchor.
You have the map, but you don't know where you are going or why you started the journey.
And if you pursue realization exclusively, you risk profound internal insight that cannot be shared, tested, or applied effectively in the external world.
The synthesis is the power. What's fascinating here is that Aham Bharatham frames them not as rivals, eternally locked in an ideological battle that has plagued Western philosophy for centuries, but as siblings who have temporarily separated.
I like that. They complete the circle of understanding, moving knowledge from cold, objective information in the head
to warm, transformational illumination in the heart, or more accurately, in the core of one's being.
Let's consider the practical validation of subjectivity here. Modern science demands objectivity. Everything must be measurable and peer-reviewed externally.
Yes.
The Vedic tradition, however, validates the subjective realization. If 1,000 different meditators from different times and places independently report the same internal experience,
The dissolution of the ego, the feeling of unity, the profound silence.
that becomes a form of internally validated, repeatable data within that philosophical system.
Exactly. Realization requires personal verification. Scientific knowledge can be outsourced to an algorithm or stored in a library or transferred via an article. You can know the theory of relativity without ever doing the math yourself.
But realization is a non-transferable state of being.
You cannot outsource your own enlightenment, nor can you realize truth by reading someone else's account of it. You must undertake the internal journey yourself.
This is why the ancient systems were focused so intensely on personal practice, on discipline, and on sustained internal work, rather than simply passive belief.
You can intellectually know the recipe for water is HO, but you only realize the profound, life-giving essence of water when you are dying of thirst and you drink it.
Or when you experience the sheer interconnectedness of all life that water represents. Both types of knowledge are necessary to live a fully informed and integrated life.
And this emphasis on realization leads us to the final, fascinating section of these insights from Aham Bharatham, which argues that these ancient concepts were far from abstract mysticism.
Right. They were actually deeply practical, precise systems designed for internal experiential engineering.
This segment is crucial because it directly challenges the historical dismissal of the Vedas. For a long time, particularly among some Western Indologists and colonial-era scholars, these profound texts were often relegated to the category of mystical rhymes.
Or folklore, or mere superstition, lacking the rigor of true scientific thought.
The argument from Aham Bharatham is that this dismissal entirely misses the central thesis, that the poetic, metaphor-rich language of the Vedas often masks systems of immense precision and depth.
They weren't merely abstract thoughts. They were, in essence, formulas for experiential science.
Yes, designed to produce predictable and verifiable results within the sphere of human consciousness and the subtle body. They were charting the internal world with the same rigor a physicist charts the external world.
We need to break down specific examples of this precision. Let's start with one of the most widely recited verses in Hinduism, the Gayatri Mantra. Aham Bharatham describes it not just as a prayer,
but as a systematic formula designed to align the human body with the solar rhythm.
This takes the concept of prayer into the realm of practical physics.
It does. The mantra is structured around 24 specific syllables, and tradition holds that these syllables, when chanted with precise intonation and rhythm, resonate with 24 subtle aspects of the body and mind.
The goal is to synchronize the internal physiological state, particularly the breath, pranayama, the heart rate, and brainwaves,
with the energy patterns of the sun, specifically at sunrise and sunset.
So the alignment is physical and energetic. By focusing on the solar light, which represents illumination, while using specific resonant sound frequencies, the practitioner is engaging in a sophisticated form of ancient biofeedback.
They are deliberately using sound and rhythm to influence internal neurological and glandular states, aiming for optimal energy balance, consciousness expansion, and physical healing. It is fundamentally practical physics applied to the human instrument.
Moving on, consider the Samaveda, which is entirely dedicated to melodies, chants, and musical composition.
Yes, and the insight from Aham Bharatham notes that the Samaveda explores vibration, or Nada Brahma, sound is God, as a core foundational element of reality.
And this is incredibly forward-thinking, isn't it? I mean, modern physics tells us that everything is vibration, from subatomic particles to light waves.
The Samaveda's focus on precise intonation, microtonal rhythm, and sound placement links directly to the basis of modern sound healing and resonance therapy.
These sages weren't just making pretty music.
Not at all. They were charting the specific psychological and physical effects of different frequencies thousands of years ago, utilizing the human voice as the primary, high-precision instrument for experiential research into energy and consciousness.
Then we have the Atharva Veda. This Veda often gets dismissed as focusing on magic or minor rituals. But Aham Bharatham emphasizes its extensive and highly precise documentation of practical systems related to well-being.
It's an incredible document of applied knowledge, It meticulously details extensive systems of herbal medicine, which form the precursor to Ayurveda, cataloging the effects of plants on the body in a systematic way.
But beyond the purely physical, it contains specific mantras and energetic techniques designed for mental health and achieving energy balance.
Exactly, targeting what we now call the energetic or subtle body. These weren't mere superstitions meant to ward off evil spirits. They were systematic tools for psychosomatic well-being, utilizing sound, intention, and natural substances to manage internal states and healing processes.
They understood that the mind, the sound, and the body were inextricably linked.
And they developed rigorous experiential systems for that interaction.
Finally, we see this cosmological precision embedded in the Rig Veda itself. Even while it contains the ultimate humility of the Nasadiya Sukta, it also speaks of creation not as a single, one-time linear event,
but as eternal cycles of expansion, sarga, and dissolution, pralaya.
This is a profound, poetic echo of today's most advanced cyclic universe theories. While the dominant scientific model historically favored a linear Big Bang, modern cosmology is increasingly exploring models where the universe undergoes infinite cycles.
Creation, expansion, collapse, perhaps a big crunch, followed by a new Big Bang. The ancient rishis viewed time not as a line with a fixed beginning and end, but as an ever-turning wheel, the Kala Chakra.
It suggests an astonishing insight into the long-term, dynamic, and infinite nature of reality. It's so far removed from the static, single-creation views held by many other ancient civilizations.
My takeaway, and what these reflections from Aham Bharatham make so abundantly clear, is that this entire philosophical pursuit was never just abstract ivory tower thought.
Yep.
It was a deep, experiential, and disciplined engagement with internal physics, biology, and consciousness, masked by the beautiful, enduring language of poetry and spiritual metaphor. They were the original empiricists of the internal world.
So, if we synthesize all these points, the enduring genius of Hindu thought, or Sanatana Dharma, which means the eternal way, is its structural renewability and its courageous humility.
It is a philosophy built not on definitive answers that must be guarded, but on the profound understanding that mystery is not an enemy of truth. It is its necessary companion.
That structural humility provides the spiritual and intellectual framework for progress in any field, doesn't it? If you are comfortable admitting that your current understanding is provisional and partial,
whether it's a scientific theory or a philosophical concept,
then you are always open to the possibility of a greater, more nuanced truth. This humility allows the system to endure and evolve, which is precisely why every generation, every seeker, and every questioner can add to it without undermining its core foundations.
And this philosophy, as Aham Bharatham so powerfully emphasizes, invites the seeker not to believe blindly or to deny blindly, but simply to explore with rigor. It radically shifts the focus from external worship to internal realization.
It's not fundamentally about worshiping external deities as the final goal, but about discovering the godliness, the infinite potential that already exists within one's own awareness.
The ultimate discovery, in any age, is not what lies out there, in the cosmos, in the genome, or in the machine, but what awakens within. That radical shift from merely knowing external facts to actively realizing internal truth is the ultimate goal of the Sanatana Dharma.
We live in an era where the data just pours in like a deluge. Science will continually rewrite its theories, and rightly so. That necessity for revision is the definition of its progress.
But perhaps it can borrow the ultimate lesson from the ancient sages, the courage to admit that knowing the data is not the same as understanding the meaning, and that absolute certainty is almost always an illusion of temporary human comprehension.
The ultimate wisdom, according to the rishis and the ideas put forward by Aham Bharatham, is that truth is not a finished theory to be proven or defended,
but an infinite presence to be realized anew by every conscious being, which raises an important question for you to consider and to explore on your own. If our greatest breakthroughs in knowledge consistently come from the moment we admit we don't have the final answer, how much faster and how much more harmoniously could humanity evolve, scientifically, spiritually, and culturally, if both our pursuit of external facts and our journey of internal discovery adopted the full, liberating humility encapsulated in that single line of the Nasadiya Sukta? Who knows? Perhaps even he does not know.
That requires deep reflection. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the profound insights of Aham Bharatham. We encourage you to reflect on that final thought and explore the difference between information and elimination in your own life. Until next time, namaste and Om Namah Shivaya.